Good morning and welcome to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. My name is Bill Benson. I am the host of the museum's public program, First Person. Thank you for joining us today for the start of our 2016 season of First Person. Our first person of 2016 is Mrs. Fanny Aizenberg, whom you shall meet shortly. This 2016 season of First Person is made possible by the generosity of the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation with additional funding from the Arlene and Daniel Fisher Foundation and the Helena Rubinstein Foundation. We are grateful for their sponsorship. First Person is a series of conversations with survivors of the Holocaust who share with us their firsthand accounts of their experience during the Holocaust. Each of our First Person guests serve as volunteers here at this museum. Our program will continue twice weekly through mid-August. The museum's website at www.ushmm.org provides information about each of our upcoming first-person guests. Fanny will share with you her first-person account of her experience during the Holocaust and as a survivor for about 45 minutes. If time allows, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask Fanny a few questions at the end of the program. The life stories of Holocaust survivors transcend the decades. What you are about to hear from Fanny is one individual's account of the Holocaust. We have prepared a brief slide presentation to help with her introduction. And we begin with this portrait of Fanny and her daughter Josiane, taken in 1942. Fanny was born December 3rd, 1916 in Lodz, Poland. That means Fanny will turn 100 years old later this year. She was the second of three daughters born to Benjamin Ohrenbach and Rivka Leah Aspis Ohrenbach. Soon after her younger sister Rose's birth in 1921, the Ohrenbachs moved with their daughters Teresa, Fanny, and Rose to Brussels, Belgium. On this map of Belgium, the arrow points to Brussels. Fanny graduated from college, where she studied dressmaking and design. While working as a dressmaker for the Royal House, Fanny met Jacques Aizenberg. On May 19, 1938, Fanny and Jacques were married. Here we see their wedding portrait. 1 year later, on March 21, 1939, Fanny gave birth to Josiane. The following year, on May 10, 1940, Germany invaded Belgium. This picture of Jacques, Fanny, and Josiane was taken in 1941. In 1942, Germany began the roundup of Belgian Jews. Fanny arranged to hide Josiane in a Carmelite convent. For security reasons, Fanny was not told where her daughter was hidden. This photo of Josiane was taken in 1941. In Brussels, Fanny worked for the underground. In 1943, she was denounced and sent to the Malines transit camp in Belgium, and then on to Auschwitz. The arrow on this map points to Auschwitz. Here we see a document recently uncovered in the International Tracing Service archive listing Fanny on the transport list from Malines to Auschwitz. She's number 119, which I know you can't see the numbers, but Fanny's number 119, and her profession of seamstress is listed in French on the right-hand side. Here we see Fanny's daughter Josiane being recognized for Fanny's work in the Belgian resistance. This photo was taken in the fall of 1944 after Belgium was liberated, but before Fanny was liberated. Fanny lives in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. She and her husband Jacques moved here in 1983 after 25 years in Atlantic City. Jacques passed away in 1988. Fanny's daughter, Josiane, lives near her and is retired from her work as a social worker for abused children. Josiane and her husband, Alfred Traum, are also Holocaust survivors, and I'm just delighted to tell you that Josiane and Freddie are both right here in the first row, right here. Thank you. Thank you. On Sundays, you will find Fanny at the museum's donors desk answering questions. Fanny's volunteer work at this museum has included translating documents from French to English. For example, she translated a book about the deportation of Belgian Jews written by a non-Jewish teacher from the Holocaust. Fanny has spoken at several seminars about the Holocaust, including this museum's event to commemorate the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. She has also been with us here at First Person several times. Fanny was last with us in 2014. Because of illness, Fanny couldn't join us in 2015, but we are thrilled she is here with us today. For 30 years, Fanny has been an active member of the Yiddish Club at a senior citizen center that meets twice weekly, and she is also a sculptor. And with that, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our first person, Mrs. Fanny Aizenberg. Hello, Fanny.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you all for coming and listen to us.
You have so much to share with us that we'll just get started right away. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay.
Gonna save me breathing.
All right. Okay. Although, Fanny, you were born in Poland and your family moved to Brussels, Belgium when you were a young child, you told me that you had a wonderful childhood. Let's begin with you telling us a little bit about that childhood, about your years before the war, your family.
Well, this has been such an unexpected trip, being very young. Mm-hmm. And another thing which was very different, learning a new language. I'm very lucky. I volunteer here once a Sunday, and it's wonderful that the majority of people come, want to listen to us. And hopefully that they're going to have a much, much better livelihood. So anyone who has any questions, please feel free to ask. And I want to thank you all for coming.
So Fanny, first I want you to tell us about your parents. Tell us about your parents and when you were a kid.
You know, it's so difficult because it's so many years ago, and life altogether was different. Not only in America, which we didn't know, but in Belgium. I have to tell you something in Belgium which hasn't happened in any country in the world. During the war, regardless of the pain and the worry we had, food was rationed, people were being just stopped on the street and deported. We were told we're going to work. But of course we didn't work well in concentration camp, and we didn't even know that word. The main thing which I have to tell you, and I would love to share with you, Belgium is the only country in the whole Europe that the churches and the cloisters, believe it or not, food was rationed, and they have been able to save 4,000 Jewish children who are alive today, thanks to the dedication of those few people. At the Holocaust Museum right here, on the 4th floor, there's a documentary of those people. They have been asked, what made you sacrifice so much and help other people? The only reason they said, isn't that the only thing we could do and share with one another? And I'm very, very lucky to have the job here as volunteer and talking to mostly young people. We cannot love each other. Well, we really could respect one another, and there's a lot to give and to take.
Fanny, I'm going to ask you just a few questions about those early years. You went to college. You
Yes.
became a dressmaker. You landed a job with a royal family. That was a really big deal.
Well, it's not because it was such a big deal, but in Belgium, if you're a good student to the 5th grade, the rest of your education is free of charge. My parents would never be able to afford to me a full scholarship.
You told me that you got married in 1938. Tell us a little bit about your husband, Jacques, whom you married in 1938.
Well, I think Belgium is a very small country, and it's not as big, of course, as America. And people live much closer with one another You have neighborhoods like you have many in small towns today. So they're such a much closer. And again, I have to tell you, Belgium is still the only country, when you think how dangerous it was to help somebody, when I have said, just to have somebody stay overnight with you or share a sandwich with you. It's so beautiful, the documentary. Those are people from the churches. And they said, isn't that the only thing we could have done and has been done? And I have to be very, very grateful, and still am. Thanks to the churches, I have my child who is alive today. And of course, she's also an old lady like I am.
And Fanny, I'm going to have you tell us a few more things about that time during the Holocaust with Josie and hiding. One of the stories you told me about Jacques that I'd like to share with the audience is that he was a trained violinist, and he performed in movie theaters.
Correct.
Right? And then
that's how many people, many young people who graduate the musical school got jobs.
And they performed in music because
that's a way of making a living. Right. Every movie house had 4 or 5 according to the size of the movie house.
And that was because they were silent movies, right?
Right.
Yep.
And then, of course, once the talkies came in, it completely stopped. And it's just like in America, people have to look for jobs.
Mm-hmm. You had Josiane in 1938.
Right.
Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland in September 1939 to begin the war. Germany attacked Belgium in May 1940. When the Germans came into Belgium, what happened to you and your family?
A big scare, because Belgium and Holland, I have maps here which we're going to give out to you so you could see the two countries. According to the law, but for Germany there was no such a thing as law. They made the law, and Belgium and Holland were supposed to remain free countries. But that didn't happen. The Germans occupied Belgium. And right away, it has been such a way of getting organized, either hiding somebody or helping somebody with food.
Soon after the Germans came into Belgium, what did your husband decide to do? What did Jacques do?
Well, also, at that particular time, there's a lot we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And immediately in the underground, Jews and non-Jews worked together. There was no difference between the two people. This is another thing what has been helped of many, many more people to be alive today, because of the people who are Jews and non-Jews working together.
Fanny, as I remember you telling me, Jacques answered the call from the British to join the Royal Air Force, and he left to go to England to join the British Army or Air Force, and you were alone with Josiane in Belgium.
Yes, because we didn't know what hell, and that's the only word I could use, is waiting for us. The Germans took small trucks and going around all the neighborhoods, that we have to listen to the orders they're giving. And if we're not going to listen to the orders, we're going to be punished. And the biggest punishment the Germans started to do, don't forget, we lived together in a neighborhood, Jews and non-Jews, and there was no difference of schools or of any education, because Belgium had 2 languages at that time and still has 2 languages, French and Flemish. At that time, many people didn't know what are we going to do. So there was a notice, also again in hiding, that anybody who could help or sign up, because we didn't know how badly the Nazis and the Germans are going to be in Belgium.
Fanny, can you tell us some of the things that the Nazis began doing to the Jews in Brussels and other places in Belgium? You had, at some point, you had to wear a yellow star.
This is another sad thing. We, not only we had to register, but we all had to wear a yellow star. Not only because it's yellow or any other color, but it's the pride to make us different. We were with neighbors, the kids were growing up together, playing together like one same population. And another thing, in Belgium, and I don't know if any other countries have that, they have crashed. It's just a special place where they have physicians and nurses to check your child and give that child, all free of charge, food, and being checked by physicians and make sure everything is okay. And of course, once the Germans came in, they put the Star of David on the door, so somebody else knew to prevent and not to go there. But besides all that, the people in the churches mainly have organized. And we didn't know who was hiding who and who was who. And like I say again, and I cannot say it again, thanks to those caring, until today, there has never been a difference between Jews and non-Jews. And that has saved people. And it shows you it didn't take money. It's just a way of caring. And this is what's still today. And this is why I'm very fortunate. I volunteer here on Sunday, because Sunday we have a very, very large audience. And that helps me talk, as you could tell. And it's so amazing how much people go back home and being different kind of people. Not they go better or not so better, but how much we have to offer one another and how much we could share with one another. And don't forget, food was rationed, and people were willing to deprive themselves, even if it was only a sandwich, in order to get that particular sandwich to somebody who didn't have any.
And Fanny, as you were telling us a couple of moments ago, you could go to these clinics for health care for Josiane.
Yes,
and then
everybody was entitled to that.
And
it
the
was
Nazis,
all free of charge.
And the Nazis said Jews could no longer go.
Of course
So
not.
you couldn't get health care anymore.
And again, the people in charge of those cares were also willing to help at night at the risk of their own lives.
Fanny, you told me that in 1942, the deportations began to deport Jews out of Brussels, out of Belgium.
Just picking them up wherever there was somebody to pick up.
In 1943, things had gotten so bad that you made this extraordinary decision to take your young child, Josie, and put her into hiding. Tell us what you remember, what that was like for you.
Well, number one, there's no words. Anybody who has a child, a sister, or a brother, you just could imagine how the parents would feel with that child not being with you anymore. And another thing, we didn't even know what's going to happen. And the agony of not knowing what's going to happen to the children. And besides that, the parents who were helped by giving the child into hiding, we were not allowed to know where they're going to be, because in case we would be caught, they were thinking then we would be deported too. And that was also a pretext that we're going to work, which was not working. It was just the gas chambers and the deportation and the selections.
Fanny, once you made that decision and Josiane went into hiding, you didn't know where she was, then you had to go into hiding too.
Yeah, absolutely, because otherwise they would know immediately where we were.
Where did you go into hiding?
In many different places in one night. There was not such a secure place, unless you were lucky and you were able to live with the nuns.
Okay, with the nuns. And one of the extraordinary things you did, Fanny, is you worked for the Belgian resistance, the underground.
Everybody did.
Everybody did. What?
Everybody did. You had 5-year-old kids, and they were exchanging newsletters because we couldn't get the newsletters. Just to show you the combination of the people of helping, and it has helped a lot.
How dangerous was that to do work for the
Very
resistance?
dangerous. Very dangerous. You had 5-year-old kids, and they were the biggest male delivering.
And if I remember right, one of the things you would do is go out at night and hand out pamphlets.
That's the only way we could do something.
The only way you could do stuff. Very, very
And
brave.
also we had an attic, and 5 people had 5 keys, so one could go or one could come without one person knowing another person.
At that time, Fanny, you were still with your mother. And
Yes.
And also in 1943, you and your mother were denounced by somebody.
That's right.
What did that mean?
It means that some people care and they're willing to help others, or if they can't help, they don't. And then on the other hand, you have people who were working with the Nazis.
And they denounced you.
And they have denounced not only us, many other people.
But when they denounced you and your mother, what happened to you then?
Well, first of all, in order to get the people together, they had one place which they made a camp. It was a Samelager where many people could get together and live together. Right there, people were about 10 days also working. And then from there, we were sent in a cattle train, 116 people in a train. By the time we all arrived in Auschwitz, which none of us ever heard that name in our lifetime, 40 people came out alive. All the rest had suffered, and they were dead. So from 116 people, and besides the 40 came out alive, they had a selection. And that's how when my mother went in one side and we were sent to another side. And that was the last time I saw my mother alive. And afterwards, we have learned the horrors committed to all of us, the selections among people, and also different kind of surgery to babies and to young women. And none of us after the war has been able to conceive.
I might ask you a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Fanny, when the last time you saw your mom, when your mother went to the other side, what happened to you then?
Well, I saw my mother there, and I figured no matter how hard it is, and we didn't know what hard means,
Right.
It would be easier just being together to help one another.
Of course.
Well, I was badly hit, and for the Nazis to beat you up, you were bleeding already, no matter a few knocks you just got. And that was the end of the thing. And they said to me, if I put you there, that's where you stay, and you don't go there.
And before long, they made you do very hard labor.
That's what we all did.
What did you do? What was your labor?
The majority of people who have been in the concentration camp, any city in Germany, the main thing we had to do is manufacture ammunition. We had to make small bombs, and there was hole in those bombs. And the bombs had to be cleaned, which we did. We worked 20 hours a day, and food not even compare to 1 hour. And that's where many people just collapsed by the fume on the back.
The fumes from making the ammunition.
And also when after the war, people just had a hard time to remain as human beings, and they could not conceive anymore. So right away there was a distortion of community, and that's where more and more schools have been helping the people. And I think that's when it started, that people could go to school if they qualified. Any trade, if somebody was not qualified to get a higher education, then they went to a trade school. You had to go, you had to have a background.
Right. Fanny, when you went to Auschwitz, you received a tattoo. You were tattooed 2 times.
Well, the reason why some of us have 2 tattoos, because we were not human beings anymore. We just were numbers. And when they check somebody with the same number twice, then they took us apart and they burned out. That's why I have 2 numbers, which a majority of young women had also 2 numbers.
2 numbers. Fanny, when we first met, you told me that the Nazis tried to literally strip from you every bit of dignity you had.
Of course,
Yep.
starting mentally. And this is why at the end of the war, in 1945, when the Russians were getting closer to the last battle, as a matter of fact, thanks to the Russians, we became free, because the last battle was won by the Russians. And because of that, which was a very, I don't know, when you go to school, you're probably going to see, the Elbe, that's the big river, that was the last war between the Russians and the Germans. And that made them win the war. They have been marching on the horses from there till Berlin, and the Russian people were the first one to get the honor to be declared free countries.
Fanny, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions later about your liberation by the Russians, but you mentioned the medical experiments. So when you were at Auschwitz, medical experiments were performed on you, weren't they?
On everybody.
And you?
On everything. There was one physician, which I'm sure in school you're hearing that name, of Mengele. He was never called a crazy physician. And his biggest, I don't know what they call evil, was to manipulate young babies and try to make them pregnant.
And Fanny, as a result of that, you were never able to have another baby.
That's
right?
correct.
Fanny, in January 1945, as the Allies, the Russians and the Allies began advancing, the Germans forced you and the others who were still alive at Auschwitz,
yes.
They forced you out and they sent you on what we call a death march.
Yes, I don't know if you learn in history the word a death march. That means people were marching for months and they die in between, and there was heavy winter and heavy snow. So each time you saw a drop of blood, that's why it was called the death march, because too many people had died on that particular march. And we were, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Fanny, please.
And also, we were very lucky because that was the end of the war. And the Russians almost won the war. And at night, they were looking to find Nazis hiding in different corners so they could really catch them. Luckily, because we were 6 women together, we didn't have families, so we became families. Because the only hope we all had is if we'd find our family or our children, if we had.
You told me in the past, Fanny, that you think that one of the reasons that you were able to survive Auschwitz and the death march was thinking about your daughter Josiane.
Just hoping, because that's all I had in that particular.
That's all you had was hope. And then there were several other inmates with you at Auschwitz that you were very close to. And
yes, that's why I say we didn't have family, so we
became
lived
family.
like family.
On that death march, they as you marched for several months, they took you to a place called Ravensbrück.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Ravensbrück.
Well, Ravensbrück was a much smaller concentration camp than Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the biggest combination of experimentation made on people. Physicians from all different countries came there and studied how fast they could invent different ways of killing people. You know, it's so difficult, for me anyway, I'm an old lady already, it's so difficult to imagine that such a civilization which the Germans are known to be, their schooling and everything, and then again, they could take a baby and just tear it in two without any remorse. And we were lucky that the Russians were looking for Germans, and that's where they found us, 6 of us, which we were more dead than alive because we couldn't stand anymore. And we all had the typhus. And the typhus is such a contagious thing that very few young women have survived that period of time.
Fanny, when the Russians found you and your 5 fellows that
Well, we were lucky because that particular group of Russians, they didn't have food and we didn't have food. So every day they went to a farm and they stole cows and they shared that with us. And that's what kept us alive. Because many young people who had been liberated by the British or by the Americans died right away because their body wasn't used to have normal food, which we call normal food today, or to digest.
Fanny, when you were liberated by the Russians and you were able to get a little bit of food, where did you go then? What did you do?
Well, we didn't go. We stayed in the hospital. Then we were inspected by American and British Red Cross.
Okay.
And most of us had the typhus, which was very contagious at that particular time because the bodies were not functioning like normal bodies. Today, you know, it's just a combination of evil and how this was able to destroy us. And you know, this is so many, many years ago. This has still not gone out of my soul. And this is with me forever. Even no matter much I try to forget or make believe it hasn't happened. This is why I volunteer here on Sunday, because they have a large group of people, students coming Sunday and asking many questions. And I still feel the only thing we could live peacefully is without having a war and respecting one another.
Fanny, after you recovered, were cared for by the Red Cross,
No, I was in 4 hospitals in Belgium and here in America in 3 hospitals.
How did you get back to Belgium?
Because of the Red Cross.
They got you to Belgium? Okay.
And also we took with us 2 other people who didn't have a home.
Okay.
They were deported and their parents were deported. So we could have done that.
And when you got back to Brussels, when you got back there, eventually you found Josiane. Can you tell us how you were reunited with Josiane?
Well, I had the sister who has remained alive during the war in Belgium, got her apartment back, and not furniture or not really decorated, but she had many of those cats, you know, those iron things you could put up, and they were quite a few. And my daughter had one and I had one. And many a night my child came to bed and to be with me. She used to attach her nightgown with mine so I would not go away anymore.
Do you remember what it was like when you first saw Josiane?
It's just like heaven, or like something. You read something in the Bible and you believe it's not believable. And it's a possibility goes through. And don't forget our mind, I don't think was correct or straight like it should be today.
And you mentioned your sister. You had two sisters, and they both had been in hiding during the war, right?
Oh, both of them by the nuns.
By the nuns.
And they were wearing the uniform the whole time of the war.
And one of your sisters actually was the first to get to Josiane.
Right.
Right. So once you were back reunited.
Because she had a big job in the underground.
In the underground.
And the churches again has given them space, and that's why they were exchanging ammunition, health food like bandages and vitamins, which people didn't have anymore.
And if I remember right, one of your sisters also had 3 children.
Correct.
That
they
were
were in a church.
They were also hidden.
The 3 boys were in a church.
And they all survived too?
Yeah.
They did. Josie was 8 years old when you saw her again. And so now you're back with Josiane, your sisters have been found, you're together. But your husband you hadn't seen since 1940.
No, because when he was in England, like many other people, one of his corner, whatever you call it, had been badly damaged, and he was for 2 years in the hospital, which he never recovered.
Before you tell me a little bit more about that, did you know at any point after he left, did you know if he was alive or dead?
We didn't, for simple reason that so many young men got together under supervision and trying to get to England. But 2 ships have blown up and nobody was alive from them. But we didn't know who died and who was alive.
So you had... Because,
you see, our radios were taken away. And without the radio, which is the only thing we have, this is before you, it's almost, like prehistoric age. Honestly, you can't believe how important a radio was to a family. And they have a radio, like a young couple getting married, that's the first gift we got, is a radio, because of the need, and your life become normal with other people.
So because you didn't have a radio and you didn't know, and it was war, and Jacques had gone to a country that was, was an ally, and there was an enemy of Germany, you had no knowledge. When did you find out about Jacques? And
much after the war. Much after the war, because the Red Cross collected all the names of the men who have signed up to go to England.
But eventually Jacques came home.
Yes, after a long time.
Well, what was that like to be after
very
all that?
damaged, very hurt. And don't forget there was 5 years separation, the 3 of us, and that was not.
For many years.
I don't think such a harm done to all of us that we could ever say that we are normal people. I don't think I am.
Fanny, when you were all back together, united, Josiane, your husband Jacques, you, your sisters, it would take another 4 years before you would come to the United States.
Yes.
What were you able to get your life back in order somewhat and get work? What would you do to survive?
Well, it wasn't order, and you couldn't say that you start where you left off.
Of course.
It doesn't exist. First of all, we all were very young, and too many unfortunate things, which you had no power and no choice of having. So you made the best of what you could.
Were you able to find work eventually in Belgium?
I had no problem of finding work, because the kind of work I was doing, lucky to have learned to do, was qualified. Not only qualified, but highly qualified. Don't forget, today you go to a store and you buy clothes. But at that time, if you had one dress, it was made for you. And that didn't change very soon, because everybody liked ready-made things.
What made you decide that you wanted to go to the United States?
Well, I felt that I could have a similar job than I had, and that was not a possibility because we didn't know there's a question of a union and you couldn't have work.
So, and it would take 4 years to get here.
That's right.
Why did it take so long?
I'm sorry?
Why did it take so long to get to the United States?
Because of the union, and too many people were without work, especially the war veterans. Many have been damaged just once now, and they all needed physical help. And that wasn't available because there were too many people who needed help. And it depends what you call help. Sometimes just open your door for overnight, that's a big help.
So finally, in 1949, the three of you came to the United States.
Right.
Where did you go, and what did you do when you got
Well,
here?
we stayed with my husband's brother for a while, and I stayed with an aunt of mine. And don't forget, we were not allowed to use the word Auschwitz, or we were not allowed to use the word camps.
Why?
Because that would make them feel bad.
That would make them feel bad. Okay.
Even today, there's many nice people who come to the museum here with the school kids. And it's not to a high degree till you explain that we could live peacefully. I mean, you don't have to love each other, but we could live peacefully. People work together, and it's not perfect, but at least it's more human.
When you came here, you were in New Jersey, and you were able to find work when you got here?
Well, not as much and not as qualified as I felt I deserved.
Well, you'd been a dressmaker for the royal family.
Well, not only, it was not called dressmaking because it was already highly qualified. Don't forget about 100 young women work just for one person. So that made available for many people to make a living. What you call a living. You know, some people need more to have a life, and others much less.
Fanny, after all that you had gone through, going to Auschwitz, the medical experimentation, the tortures that you went through, typhus, which you mentioned a couple of times, when you got to the United States, what was your health like?
Well, I was twice in the hospital because I had inside, apparently, there was some Germans or something. And that's another reason why we could not conceive.
And how about Jacques? How was Jacques doing?
Well, he was broken up till he died.
Tell us a little bit about your sisters. What did they do?
Well, my sister had a little store, and that's the only thing they could do.
In Belgium?
In Belgium, and also because they have been involved with a certain specified underground people who did much more. They were exchanging ammunitions. Like one thing got bad, so they were able to change it and get others to continue working. So that's why they got a small pension because of that.
Fanny, when did you learn for certain what happened to your mother?
Because right after we were settled and sent to different jobs, and we were checked by the big shot. That's how we met Hitler. He came to the factory. And because we didn't make our quota then, he said, you know where you want to wind up. And that's where we were sure that our loved ones have not been alive anymore.
That's when you knew that she'd been
And
murdered.
on the dead bodies, the Nazis make experimentation. Little by little we find out, not only in America and many other states, to what extent it was, even after the war, what the Nazis had done.
If you don't mind, Fanny, tell us what it was like for Josiane, who was so little when she came to the United States. What was it like for her?
She had a very hard time, number one, language.
Language.
That's very difficult. You may not realize, but it's very difficult to learn English. And not only that, we had to know English because to apply for American citizen, you had to know English. Now you don't have to do a lot of things, but at that time you had to do a lot of things.
So eventually everybody learned English, and Josiane did very well in school over time.
Always.
Always.
But don't forget, we tried to do better.
I know you worked very, very hard once you came
We
here.
did.
Yeah.
We did. But we have appreciated a lot of things, which I have hoped, and that's another reason why I have chosen to volunteer at the Holocaust Museum to teenagers. They listen to you a little better.
Well, you know, Fanny, I think we have some time to ask our audience if they would like to ask you a few questions. Would you like
Absolutely.
that?
I hope I could answer them, because the young people are so smart today.
So, Fanny, here's what we're going to do. I think we have some microphones that are available. When somebody asks a question, I'm going to repeat it so that you hear it and everybody in the room hears it, and then you, if you want to answer it, you answer it. Okay? So let's see if anybody would like to ask Fanny a question. We will have mics, as I said. Please wait till you have the microphone in your hand. That'll help all of us, including Fanny, hear your questions. So if anybody has a question, we have one back here, I believe. Okay? Yes, in the very back.
Yes. Hi, thank you for sharing your story. It was very inspiring. My question is, after the 4-year period, after the war ended, and before when you left to America, how did the non-Jewish people who had originally disposed you and had persecuted you emotionally and physically, how did they treat you after the war and after you had been liberated?
After you were liberated, I want to make sure I get the question right. After you were liberated, how did the non-Jewish people who had persecuted you, how did they treat you after the war?
It all depends. In Belgium, we were received like people. And that goes for churches and all other organizations. It's not I have more than you have, or you have more than I had. That anger and that hate has not continued with us and with the people who felt lucky to remain sane and alive, and their families not touched.
Thank you, Fanny. Thank you for that question. Okay, do we have another one? I think we've got one right there in the middle.
And again, thank you for sharing today. I'm a physician in Texas, and your comments about the atrocities that you experienced under the hands of people who, I'll say, called themselves physicians, it's just unimaginable. So my question for you, after experiencing that and coming back to the world outside of that experience, was it hard for you to trust someone who would say, I am a physician, which I would hope is a very trusted profession, or any other profession for that matter, just trusting people? Thank you.
Fanny, the gentleman asked the question, is a physician from Texas, and he asks if after the war, after what you went through with the Nazi doctors after the war, were you able to trust physicians afterwards when you came to the United States? Were you able?
It was very difficult.
It was difficult.
But the decency which we have remained with, and I'm 99 years old, it's with you, and it stays with you as long as you live. But I'm glad you asked that question, because it's so human, and we all go through that.
Thank you, Fanny. Thank you. Right here. Here comes the mic for you. Thank you, Brooke.
Hi, I'm a teacher, and I have a pretty loud voice anyway. Part of our curriculum has us teaching our children about the Holocaust. And I want to know what you feel is the very most important things that we make sure our young people understand. Because I teach resilience, but what else is important than our children need to understand.
As a teacher, she's asking, what do you think is the most important thing about the Holocaust to teach children today? What is most important?
The most important thing is just to show one another that we could live peacefully. You don't have to love each other. But it's so much easier because we each have something more to offer somebody else. Even here at the museum, where they have so many special rooms and so much to learn, they have one room which shows you what one person could do just to help somebody nice. Even yourself, sometimes you help a teacher who's down or something is in the family and it hurts them. So there's so many ways. But the main thing is just the care.
Sometimes that's a tough lesson, but it's the right lesson, right,
But
Fanny?
you can. We did.
We did.
None of us run around crazy in the streets.
All right. We have another question right here. Brooke, we have one right. We have two here. Okay. Okay.
They told me when I talked. Okay, I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, I know that you were a feminine young lady at the time, but you did see an invasion of your country. Do you have any thoughts, or does your daughter have any thoughts as to how to resist that as citizens of the United States?
I think the question is, Belgium was invaded. You know, what could Belgium have done to resist that? Could they have resisted that invasion?
Well, don't forget, Belgium is a very small country compared to Germany, and besides, Germany has been equipped and maneuvered already what they're going to do. Because Belgium and Holland were supposed to remain free country, which they never had. Meanwhile, they were able to steal a lot of things to help them to keep the war going, which no other country had a chance, an opportunity to exchange merchandise or labor.
Okay.
Belgium, in Antwerp alone, in one small city, it was the only city where every citizen was making a living by working for the diamond business, in wholesale or small. The whole city, they were making a living. And it immediately disappeared because the Nazis took it.
Okay, do we have one back here? I think we had another hand over here. And we have one over here too. Got several, okay. Let's go here, then we'll come to you, okay?
Hi.
All right.
Can you speak a little bit about the culture among prisoners in Auschwitz?
Say that one more time.
I'm just curious about like the culture among prisoners in Auschwitz and like how you interacted with each other while you were under like such harsh conditions.
What was it like for you with your other fellow inmates and the other prisoners at Auschwitz? You said you got very close to some of them. How were you able to do that under such hard circumstances?
Because it was a matter of saving our lives.
Okay.
Because, I don't know if you know, there's one Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur. And that in itself has made us like sisters and brothers. Or just somebody, and you could pray together.
You could pray together. Mm-hmm.
Which otherwise you don't have. And it's amazing how many things have become so important, like people in our lives. Look like myself, I'm every Sunday here, and it's quite a big pride.
One of the things that Fanny shared with me, part of coming here on Sundays, where there are a lot of younger volunteers, just the relationships and the friendships that you've developed with them.
That's another friend of mine.
And that's one right in the front row, right here, one of our security personnel.
There was
Become
another
very good friends,
person
yes.
who was a volunteer. It's interesting that we have so many wonderful young people who volunteer in so many ways at the museum. They're not all Jewish.
Thank you, Fanny. And so I promised over here, yes, and then down here.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how afterwards, I think in the introduction it was mentioned that you worked as a social worker, and it just seems like even when you worked in resistance, like you're very dedicated to giving back. And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of your story is how hopeful you are. So I just kind of wanted to know, like, aside from your daughter, like where that stems from, this need to give back and this hope and like, I guess like trust in humanity. And also when you were speaking about everyone needs to like not necessarily love each other, but still live together. Like, how can people emulate you in that?
And I'm going to try and paraphrase
that was long.
as best I can. But she's very impressed, the young lady's very impressed with how you've wanted to give back, how you raised Josiane, who became not just a social worker, but a social worker with abused children for an entire career. So how have you been able to find what it takes to give back?
It's in you. Either you have it or you don't. And I tell you another thing. Because of the situation, and we had so much in common with somebody else, so you could pour out your heart as much because everybody would understand what you're saying.
That made it easier to pour your hearts out to each
Correct.
other. Okay. Okay. I have one right here that I promised, yes, and then we'll come back to you, sir. Yeah. Right down here. And I know that other hands have gone up as well. Yeah.
Hi, Fanny. What do you think is the main reason that you were able to survive such atrocities that you lived through?
Fanny, what do you think is the main reason that you were able to survive the atrocities, all that you went through?
I'm not so wise to have an answer, I'm sorry. But it takes many people, and many people caring for you, just showing that they care for you. You'll be surprised how much that helps. That's why I always say, it's so much easier to be friendly with people. Look, we have election, people are insulting one another. Does it make it any better? Okay. I didn't say who I'm gonna vote.
You did not. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to close our program, and we're going to hear one more time from Fanny. So the gentleman right here.
I was just wondering how you made meaning out of what happened to you, and especially if your faith and your Judaism was a part of that.
The question he's asking is how you were able to make meaning out of all that you went to, and how important has been your faith, your Jewish religion?
Very hardly. You have to think twice before you really can make a statement. That's why I feel anybody, especially seniors, and of course young people, have even so much more to learn here. Because I feel I'm learning when a group of youngsters, high school, or even before. That is helping you. And be your mind open and listen to somebody else. Because everybody has something to offer to somebody else. You'd be surprised how many times we're down in the dumps for one reason or not. And you just feel you have another soul.
I want to thank all of you for being with us at our first person program of 2016. We will do this program twice a week, Wednesdays and Thursdays, until the middle of August, so we hope that you'll have the opportunity to come back. A little later, I think in April, we're going to start live streaming programs, and so you can listen to it and watch it over the internet, which is very exciting. And I think those will be archived, so you'll be able to hear them at another time as well. I believe I'm right about that. So we welcome you to either come back live or listen to us over the internet at some
And
point.
the doors are open. Excuse to interrupt you. The doors are open. Doesn't cost you anything.
No, that the
You
doors open
walk-
doesn't cost you anything. Exactly right. Absolutely. So. It's our tradition at First Person that our first person has the last word. So I'm going to turn back to Fanny to close our program in just a moment. And I want to say that when Fanny's done, I'm going to ask you to all stand because our photographer Joel is going to come up on right here in front of me, going to come up on stage and take a picture. One of which will be with you as the background to Fanny here on the stage. So when Fanny's done, let's please do that. Rise and we'll get some photographs. So Fanny, thank you for being with us. And what are your last thoughts for us today?
Well, I think and I appreciate you have already made such a big step and you open your mind. That's it.
That's it. All right. Thank you, Fanny. You've shared so much
Thank you
with
all
us.
for coming. I really appreciate that. Thank you.